This is Recruiters on the Rise, and I'm Colleen Gallagher. Join me for candid conversations with talent leaders as we explore the work that drives them, the lessons they've learned, and how they're helping people find careers they love. The show is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform built by Textio. Hello, and welcome everyone to today's episode of Recruiters on the Rise. I'm so excited to have our guest with us today. He has been in the recruiting game since the mid 90s, back when Java wasn't a thing and there were no online tools to even speak of. He spent years in tech and biotech before making a deliberate move to an in-home senior care company where he's now building out the recruiting function for a very fast-growing company that's here in the Bay Area. He has 7 years of sales experience, and he'll tell you why he thinks that made him a better recruiter. He's also in the middle of solving a problem most recruiters never have to think about, which is what happens after you hire them, but you're still, you know, on the hook to make sure that you're maintaining that talent. He currently serves as the director of talent acquisition at Hillendale Home Care. John Curran, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to dive in. So let's start. I love to start the show with just hearing from our guest about what do you think is the one thing or one action that sets the best recruiters apart from the rest?
It's really hard to pick one thing, but the one thing that has always struck me is someone who is really curious. I bumped into recruiters. I think we've all had this situation where meet a senior recruiter. It's kind of formulaic, right? They can work within a large company. They have the pattern down, and it's a good pattern, right? I know how to do an intake. I know how to source talent. I know how to really think about submitting the right 3 or 4 candidates. But the ones who really set themselves apart for me, the ones who are really curious and kind of lean into doing it a little bit different. And that's not everyone's go-to place. I get that. I really feel like, hey, we can all make a nice living kind of following that pattern. But for me and for other people, I think being really successful is because they lean into something that's a little uncomfortable. Like, okay, I want to do this a little differently, or I'm seeing something I really don't really think is going to help us find the right person, and kind of being able to speak out in a very professional, positive way. But that curiosity kind of helps them be a little less afraid, come across as a little bit more of the expert. So that is really critical. I will add one. I know I'm breaking the rules here. I've also seen some people who really want to know how I'm doing. So they're more metrics driven. So they're okay with that. But I remember having meetings with some very senior recruiters on teams and talking about how we're going to have KPIs and metrics. And you can see their eyes get big and there's fear in their eyes. Like, oh, well, I make a certain number of hires and my managers are happy. I'm like, okay, that's great. But if we're really thinking about the partnership with recruiters and a hiring leader, that partnership, you got to measure it in some ways that may feel uncomfortable, but get to some root issues. So again, being curious, being open to that is really key.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're touching on this, but it sounds like what you're saying is recruiters should be more metrics driven, and a lot of them push back on that. Like, what metrics matter to you and why? You just mentioned a couple, but would love to dive in here a little bit more.
It's the quality of hiring metrics that are hard to get to. So for me, I'm trying to get some aspect of quality, and sometimes it's a survey. So I've had candidate surveys, I've had hiring manager surveys. I remember using this product, the recruiter effectiveness dashboard. I don't know if you remember it. It's way back when I was at Symantec. And it was a very structured survey that went out and said, how am I doing? But again, it's not how am I doing? It's how is this partnership doing, right? So sometimes it's how is the business interacting with us? So I do like that, although it's subjective. It's like, how do my managers feel about me? You might get some meaningful feedback. And you're going to get those outliers, which make a recruiter feel like kind of vulnerable or, make me feel like I didn't do the right thing, but it's useful information. The more, I think, relevant numbers, and a lot of us do this, is we take a look at how many people do I speak to as a recruiter? How many people do I submit? How many people does the manager want to talk to? So those conversion metrics speak a lot. So at Symantec, for example, we're looking at quality of talent. We're really getting pushed to find elite talent. Invitae, the same thing, was a biotech company. And they look for bar raising talent. You love this bar raising talent number term. And So we did take a look at how many people it took to submit to get to interview to offer. Offer, not hire, because people will turn down offers in some situations, right? And we did find, like, for our non-tech hiring, it was 5 to 3 to 1. I'd give you 5 candidates. You interview three, and you'd hire one. That's pretty good. But ratio was more for the tech talent, this elite talent. So it was maybe 5 candidates being interviewed to get to one hire. Not a big difference, but it helped us kind of root out some issues. So when they talked about elite talent, we're like, huh, that's different than the rest of the organization. What's going on with that tech organization? And when we realized is the people that were doing interviews were not the elite talent of those teams. So there was a fear of them hiring somebody who was a little bit better than them. So it's interesting, again, right? Quality of hire. This is not about the recruiter doing a good or bad job. It's about those teams and how they were set up to hire.
Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting because I feel like right now, and again, to your point, I don't think this is a new phrase, but maybe it's just resurfaced a lot is this idea of a bar raiser. And I think, my perspective on why this is sort of resurfacing is I think we're in a spot right now where, coming out of some of the hiring trends from, 2016, 17, 18 through 2022, which have sort of completely reversed course. I think what people are realizing is when you're hiring, you know, 100 people every quarter or every year, and now you're only hiring a quarter of that, it matters more that you hire the right person. And so people are really, and, sort of with this narrative going on that AI is going to remove jobs, and a lot of companies are talking about layoffs in relation to, because of AI, it does feel like there is more of this recognition around, oh, the people I hire have to be really truly bar raisers. Not to use like an overly used term, right? But is that something like, would you agree, or how do you see what's happening right now?
I would generally agree. I think the problem is sometimes people looking for that elite talent and they want them to check all the boxes. Okay. Then I always talk about what's the pull into this job, right? So what is something they can learn versus something that they have to show up with? And if you're going to bring in elite talent, they're looking to get better in some way. You want them to have 5 or 6 of those key things, and they don't have all 5 or 6. That's great. You must have it. You better have a great employer brand. You better be, the Googles or the Facebooks, which had lots of layoffs, right? So that's not even the play anymore. But I think you have to have something that's going to attract them and they're going to get better. So, like, for example, when I was in biotech, they had a passion for helping patients. Okay, I could offer that. Or there was a cool technology that we were using and they want access to it. So I think it's individual, but I do think a good recruiter can tune into that and still bring that kind of elite talent. Because otherwise you get down the line and you realize you can't afford them. They've got competitive offers. And it also, and that throws off a lot of the internal equity if you're trying to pay for that elite talent sometimes.
Yeah. I know you've done some creative things around employer branding. What are some of the more effective things you've done that helps you show some of the authenticity and culture?
Well, authenticity is the word. I love that because I do think the key to the employer branding is being authentic. I've been lucky enough to be part of like a lot of these different projects where you look at what is our brand, right? What's our EVP? Big fancy word. I work with a couple outside companies who are large global companies who would come in and do the analysis. And then I worked at a smaller company, Genomic Health, where I had to do that myself, which was interesting. But I kind of follow the pattern. You kind of learn, right? Let's pull some people together, talk about what our brand really is. And I think authentic is the key. So I'll use Genomic Health as an example. It was focused on cancer diagnostics. It was a culture that was very connected and focused on patients, but there's also a culture of nice. And I say that because that was part of the brand. So we were trying to capture that. And I have a marketing degree, so I want to put that to work, right? Every once in a while, let's make the college degree meaningful. So it kind of started with one thing. Someone said, let's have a flash mob. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And they flash mob. We had this community where we would all show up for lunch and come to the cafeteria, which was kind of fun. I said, let's do a flash mob, just throw everyone off. So legal and HR got together and we didn't tell anybody. And the plan was to record this because it does kind of highlight this culture of like, we can have fun. And it was some Justin Bieber song. I don't even remember it anymore. It had dance moves, and I'm not a dancer. My wife's a much better dancer. And they were all eating lunch, and we just kind of all kind of came in, turned on some music, and did this. It's about 2 minute routine, right? We capture that. And that led to like other creative ideas. So, example, we decided to have an employee video contest where people would do videos. So we had all these teams doing things, and we had a customer service team that was really creative. And they did this very long one, and I can't even describe it. It was so cool. We captured that as well. Now there's some issues with that. You got to make sure the music is right. You can't broadcast certain things. So that was interesting. And then we started to get, okay, well, we're going to have to be more structured with this approach. So I knew a guy in LA, and the guy in LA knew the producer for these kind of these reality shows, like Survivor. So with this big motion sensor camera that you move around, so cool, right? I think we paid him 12 grand to record 8 videos, 8 or 9 videos, which are each 2 minutes long. Pretty good, right?
Yeah, that's very, very good.
So this is authentic. You're trying to capture the authentic spirit of the company. And we found 5 or 6 people, sure, the CEO, but certain personalities in the office that people kind of were drawn to. And we did these videos, and they're all a little different. In the end, everyone was talking about their story, about how cancer impacted their lives. It was really interesting. And then we took those and we put those on YouTube. We could do those because that was a little more edited. We could use the in some ways, but we didn't know the barriers, right? What I loved about this is we didn't ask a lot of permission. We just started walking the hallways. Those, we would watch the views on those, and those views would easily get into the thousands. And then people would come into the office and say, "Oh my God, you're the person on the culture video. I saw you. Oh, it's so cool to meet you." And so you did capture the authenticity of mission driven patients, this culture that had fun, that cared about each other, low ego, and it was tangible. I think a lot of people talk about that. They don't really do a good job talking about brand. It's a lot of the same words. The challenge is like, what's unique to you? You're not going to be everything to everyone. You're going to want to say, we're this company, not that company, right? We weren't very top driven. We didn't pay the most money. We didn't have the best cafeteria. Other companies could do those things. So that for me, brand is trying to capture that in a way that's meaningful and then tunes into the audience, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's so I love that, and that specific example is so fun. I worked at a company once where we just did a very simple internal thing of asking everyone, "How do you see yourself helping us as an overall organization?" And especially at the time when I was in the finance team, I think we often felt pretty disconnected from customers, right? Um, and it was a really good way to make everyone sort of recognize like how they're serving a broader mission. And we helped researchers and librarians, and so there was a lot that they were then helping. So then we did like customer stories, but I think it's still of my entire time there, one of the things that like sticks out to me the most. And it's very it was very authentic, and sort of gave to your point of that word, and gave everyone a moment to actually say like, okay, like, this is why when I'm doing, X, Y, and Z on a day-to-day basis, this is actually helpful and meaningful, and help them understand, what value they brought to the organization besides just, I don't know, feeling like another cog in the wheel, I guess.
It stays with you, right? You feel it. And there's still a Genomic Health like alumni group that gets together and has a dinner and lunches, right? And I think when you have that, that's pretty special. Not all companies have that. I mean, here's an example where I felt like it was a big company, didn't have that same culture. Symantec. I was there at Symantec when we were moving into cloud. And this is just a small example, but we were moving into cloud and we couldn't find any cloud engineers. And cloud engineers only existed at Google, by the way. So these are ability engineers, very specific at the time. And the only people who did that worked at that one company. So you're trying to get a very limited audience. So you're first trying to hire Java people. Nobody had real Java experience. It was interesting because we paid the same guy I worked with for the LA thing I actually worked with back then. He did a survey of people who turned us down. And it was interesting. Like, why don't you want to work with Symantec? Well, because it's a big, slow moving company. It's not cool. I don't like the tools. So we had to promote it as, we're actually going to create a little bubble around you, and you're going to be able to kind of do a bunch of stuff that the regular employees can't do. You got some cool tools. And this leader we have, Stephen from Google, was really highly thought of. You get to work with this amazing leader. And then we're able to hire like 100 cloud engineers in a very short period of time. So a lot of it is like, okay, how do I want to think about this and bring people who do fit and give them an environment where they can succeed? That's interesting.
I mean, I guess tying it back to what we were talking about earlier as it relates to metrics, I think, you know, when you and I talked previously, you mentioned something around like a lot of recruiters don't feel like they need to own time to fill because that hiring decision is owned by the hiring manager. But I think, I'd love to hear more about your belief on this. And the reason I'm sort of tying this in is like, I think it ties in because, you know, hiring managers need coaching from recruiters, but I'd love to hear more from you versus me on this.
Well, so I had a 1-year stint with Danaher. Now, Danaher is this big company with like 10 different divisions. And so Genomic Health got acquired by Exact Sciences. I stayed on with Exact Sciences for a short period of time. Then I'm like, I kind of want to do something else. So I went to Danaher and I was the head of the Cephia division. Now, the reason this is relevant is because they are very, very, very metrics driven. There's this thing called Danaher Business Systems, which is very much, it's another word for Lean Six Sigma, right? And they have these very strict processes like Kaizens you get into for multiple days and you do all the contingencies and it's crazy. Well, one of the things I didn't realize when I was hired is I got hired 2 months before COVID hit and they did the COVID test. Well, we had to go from 2,500 employees to 7,500 employees in 1 year. And it was a huge moneymaker for Danaher. I was privileged to be part of that. And in part of that, you learn all of these processes for metrics. But one of them was, how long does it take to get per hire? And you would actually have a weekly meeting with all the global manufacturing leaders. You have a scorecard. It's red or it's green. There's no difference. But a lot of it was looking at phases of hiring. So if we look at that, like, okay, it's fine. Well, a lot of people do that. We would look at every single job of 435 manufacturing positions. And we would look at stages of hiring. And what we found is you'd see bottlenecks in the process. So what it does is it diagnoses a root issue. This is not a recruiter problem. We were opening a huge manufacturing facility in Newark, California. We had to hire 600 engineers in a very limited period of time. We had done a Kaizen, which is this very formal process. And then we got into it, realized there were certain issues. When you start with the leaders, which you typically hire the leaders in those big expansions, there are only so many people to interview. And they were so pulled into the day-to-day manufacturing, they would only want to do interviews after 5. So we had what's called standard work. And it's a thing because once you do it, everyone has to follow it. There's no debating it. It's very interesting. So we actually had to look at those metrics and say, it wasn't about the volume of talent. It was getting them through the process. So it does help you show, for example, that there were a limited number of interviewers. And as we hired more leaders, we got more interviewers. But we also had to have rules. And the rules were, you're not going to tell us if you like the candidates because that was a delay. That was a bottleneck. Like we're waiting for them to say, do you like this person? No, we don't do that anymore. We're going to bring in 6 to 8 people on a Wednesday. You're going to interview them Wednesday. You're going to make a decision on Friday between 2 and 3 p.m. And you can't wait till the next week when they're gone to another competitor. So it was interesting because you could lean on it in this culture, which is very intense manufacturing culture. Those times in between, we would measure. And there was another situation where we couldn't hire a logistics people to manage all the stuff coming in and out of these big manufacturing sites. So we found that one person was looking for SAP experience in logistics in Sunnyvale. Now I had a tool which said how many people existed. It's an interesting thing. We kept looking at this and it's kind of related. I think you'll find it interesting. Turns out of the 13 people in the South Bay who have SAP experience in logistics, 11 of them were with Cepheid already. 2 of them were working in some place and they're not coming. Sorry, we talked to them. So what we did though is we pivoted and we realized that there are other similar applications that are completely learnable and teachable. Why don't we teach them ECP? Talking about elite talent and pulling them in, right? We had some very difficult conversations with the leaders like, no, 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 I want to keep looking. Like, no one's going to take this job who's going to like a million miles away. We're going to teach them that skill. We're going to bring them in. And that was the answer, right? So these timeframes between each of the steps can show you like where it's working well, where it's not working well. We can have a manager who's hiring the same people here and you rejecting them over here. I do like the metrics in the sense that it does guide you to the right answers.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we know from um we meaning Textio know from obviously working with recruiters for as long as we have is like those process bottlenecks end up being the biggest challenge of trying to solve in many cases. And it sounds like at least with Danaher, because they were so process oriented, you could set one up, but a lot of people aren't as open to feeling that way or being told like you have to have a decision made between 2 and 3 on Friday afternoon. So how have you solved for those types of challenges in other places?
Yeah, I think I've done something a little bit different. Those other locations. You're spot on, by the way. When I don't have the ability to enforce like this process, I have to convince them. So there are times where I've gotten one person who's really enthusiastic about doing it a little differently, and I try it with them. Hey, hey, you're open to it. Let's try it over here. And then I would bring it up at the meeting, like they tried it. It worked better over here. Hey, if you want in, raise your hand. Otherwise, you don't get it. You don't get this. So this happened at Symantec. We're hiring those cloud engineers, right? So it's just the same thing. We're like, hey, you know what? We're gonna work a different process over here. And this guy hired 10 engineers. Turns out these 10 engineers were rejected by the same manager doing the same skill set over here, right? And he got called out in the staff meeting, which was not friendly for this person. He's like, wait, I'll change my filter. I'll reduce the bar. I'll kind of hire those people because apparently that's what you want, right? So sometimes it's getting them to see peers being more successful. But I also think there were good recruiters going to speak out and say, you know what? I think you're hurting yourself here. And younger recruiters don't do it, but I've had younger recruiters who had that kind of influence and are persuasive and kind of do that. And older recruiters are like senior recruiters, I say senior recruiters, who are fearful of that. They're still saying, I'll do what the manager wants. And this is where I think we as recruiters, we talk about being a consultant. Those are the moments that really make a difference. You got to speak up and you can do that in a nice way.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to your opening thing around what makes a good recruiter is curiosity is like I think you can sort of use that as a way to build trust and influence with the hiring manager because as a recruiter, you're the subject matter expert on hiring, right? The hiring manager is a subject matter expert on their functional role and what they need. And, I think when it works best, you sort of get the best elements of those two profiles being brought together. And you can't do that when it's like an us versus them it has to be that partnership.
You know, I would go into organizations and I would look for, this is one of the questions I ask as a talent leader. Any leaders out there can ask this question. But who is the most difficult customer you have and why? And I've had situations, so it's very clear. It's this person over here. And when I meet with that person, I'm like, hey, I'm here to help you. You tell me what you need. I'm going to build a process that works for you. I said, you have that. You can come to me with any feedback. I'm going to open. I'm going to listen. What I'm asking that I can come back to you. If I can't solve an issue that's kind of across your team because I see it and I'm not getting like adoption, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to tell you, and you need to have my back because we're in this together. And that's the other part of this recruiters miss. We're in this together. We want to do this thing. Like I want to get you to the right hire. And the way you're going to do that is it's not about me. It's not about you winning. It's about us winning. Right. And I had a leader who said, I'm going to challenge that thought, not the person. So I do think a good recruiter knows how to challenge that thought without making them feel like they got like, you questioning themselves.
I love that phrase, challenge the thought, not the person. That's so true. A lot of figuring out things as a manager and a leader is how you give people feedback without putting people on the defensive, right? Um, and so, yeah, that nuanced way of saying it, I think is incredibly insightful. All right. Well, I want to pivot a little because you left tech and biotech for your current role at an in-home senior care um, company. So what made you make that shift?
Well, a couple things. One was I felt like I wanted to do something a little bit more connected to me personally. So my mom is 90 years old. Um, she is getting older. She wants to stay in her home. And the other was commute. I feel a lot of us are making these terrible commutes in the Bay Area. It was a 4 to 5 hour commute to go to this company. It was at Garden, great company, great team, great people, and had a global talent. And you know what? It was killing me to get there every day. And because this back to the office kind of thing was rough. But then I got a chance to reevaluate. And I said, you know what? There's a lot of companies out there who are not tech companies out here in the East Bay, California, San Francisco Bay Area for anywhere out there. You kind of feel like you either have to commit to that and suffer, or you don't work, right? This is my message to people who are laid off, a lot of people who are displaced. There are so many non-tech companies that can use your help right now. Because what I'm finding is the non-tech companies really need our expertise. So for me, I found a company that happened to be in-home senior care. They are based 15 minutes from my home. I can bring my dog to work. They love my French bulldog running around the office, right? So the situation was better for me in terms of getting here, but they also are expanding rapidly. And they're in a place where maybe a lot of the tech or biotech companies were 5 to 10 years ago. So what we're doing at Hillendale Home Care is we're building a whole different model of recruiting, which is super fun for me. So I feel really empowered. I feel appreciated. That's another part of going to the non-tech companies. You feel appreciated because, oh my God, your ideas are so welcome. So that's where I would say people look for that. You're going to get less money, just the fact sometimes, but the satisfaction level and how you can have impact is much greater. Like we're looking at a lot of cool stuff. Like, by the way, I've used Textio, your product. Awesome. I love it. New companies, I'm a huge fan of it. And that was like my entry point into AI, right? But we use AI, for example, for something called Care GPT. We took Chat GPT and we created our own little mini version of it. And we interview people and then we use it to create a caregiver profile. And that caregiver profile then sits and we use that to promote those to our senior clients. So we're thinking about that. We're putting in new foundational systems that help with soft skills assessments, have an ATS kind of going into action. I'm actually the project manager for that. So I'm super excited to be here because as this company expands into other places around the Bay Area, it's like a mid-sized company, like a large company like the Key or small mom and pop. It's perfectly placed for me and me of impact. Well, I really appreciate the culture similar to Genomic Health. Nice, patient-driven, caring. The challenge I have at this one is interesting because you mentioned it earlier is once you hire these caregivers, you're kind of renting the talent. You hire them, but they also work for other companies as caregivers. And they'll be available as long as you give them something a little bit better than the other people that are contacting at the same time. So you hire them, they come through the door. You don't know if they're really working for you or not, or open to talking to you. They're willing to say yes, but you have to give them ongoing work. Then you hire, then you go get clients, seniors and their families who want in-home care and constantly changing. It's constantly shifting. By that, I mean, you have a senior who just needs support for a month and then they're healthy again, or it's 24/7 care, or it's kind of intermittent. And now I find a caregiver who can work a certain shift at a certain time and then it goes away. And then I have to do the client matching with again. So you're constantly having to rematch and realign a senior with a caregiver. And these caregivers have competitors calling them at the same time. It's nuts. So I am playing with metrics, getting back to that. Uh, I'm using Claude AI in combination with ChatGPT to do cool stuff. And just this morning, I built a active caregiver analysis process where you do a funnel. You look at like who's been contacted, who's not been contacted. Are they activated? To what degree are they activated? Which are less desirable and you're deactivating? And you can set targets. 80 to 90% of your caregivers should be active. I figured that out, right? So I feel like it's fun for me to play in this space because we can be disruptive. We can do something different. And it's a culture where I do think we have more impact than the average company in this space.
And it's like, it's fun to know that like what you're doing is helping people in need build a community or get the care that they need, right? Especially right now when like there is this trend, especially, and I think we're in a little bit of a bubble out here on the West Coast in the, bastion of AI. Um, it's nice to see a business where like the goal is to have connection between people.
Oh yeah. I mean, so the caregivers are right outside my office here. We actually meet them and we hear their stories. They're the most kind people you'll ever meet. And a lot of people we hire are first-time caregivers who have done this for their parents. They don't make a lot of money. It's just one of those things in the industry where for not a lot of money, they are taking care of your mom or dad or your relative or someone in your family. And they're there 24/7 sometimes. They're helping them eat. They're helping them clean the house. They're helping them bathe. It's really impactful. So we try to recognize those caregivers like caregiver of the quarter and caregiver of the uh, quarter. And we have this awesome reward system called Caribou, which we allow them to get rewards. Someone says something nice, we give them Caribou points, which turns into dollars. It is really interesting to be in this space. And I appreciate the opportunity because I'm helping people like my mom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting hearing you talk about this, like just I'm noticing how much like you're lighting up talking about it. And so I can see like the passion and it seems like it's allowed you to sort of like tap into that curiosity and learning a lot more than what you've been doing. Like you said, you'd been in tech and biotech for a number of years. And this feels like an exciting challenge, which is also great that it's a 15-minute commute and, you know, doing something different can be fun.
Well, that's right. I think people should be open to, an industry maybe you weren't open to before, right? You might find that you can get what I have, which is a chance to really come in and play and be thoughtful and and get creative. This is the curious part back to the beginning, right? Um, New metrics, like new models, like we're looking at like the future of in-home senior care 3 to 5 years from now. And like, for example, like some of this is AI intelligence, but it's like a super centralized um, process where you have local recruiting pods who are highly empowered to kind of function independently, kind of where we're headed. And if you go to other companies, they're not doing that stuff. So for me, it's fun because I get to really think about like way in the future and cool. And you get that flexibility. I think in some tech and biotech environments, you kind of feel locked in. There's a process. Here's your box. Stay in the box. And I feel like there are more opportunities for other people like me out there.
Yeah. One of the things you also mentioned to me previously was that you've done, most of the hiring of the caregivers was primarily inbound from Indeed, and now you're building more of an outbound strategy. Like, what does that shift look like, and how are you approaching that in this environment?
So yeah, when I first showed up, it was mostly people who apply to jobs. And we all know if you're just waiting for people to apply to jobs, you're probably not getting the better talent. So what we have focused on is outbound sourcing. So for example, we have a CRM in our ATS. We're moving to Greenhouse, and that CRM is going to allow us to draw circles around certain pools of talent. We started to focus on less companion level care and more skill leveled caregivers. Because right now, for example, this may sound weird, but I can hire as many caregivers as I can hire in a month, and there's no limit, which is weird. So now we're shifting to trying to find people who fit that certain profile and to do more outbound marketing. So we are more community driven. So we're establishing partnerships in the Bay Area with nursing schools, community colleges, adult learning schools, go up, and we are be able to really market ourselves and be more selective. So part of it's employer branding, outbound with community. We've always been really strong on referrals. We're trying to not be so dependent. So now it's recruiters using tools to now target that talent and then put them in our own kind of proprietary database and kind of keep them active. So that shift is interesting. It does take a knowledge of a county, like for each county in the Bay Area, we have to know what's going on. Oh, very different than over here in Walnut Creek. I know this is a very Bay Area conversation for everyone, but Sonoma County and Marin County, very different. If you're not part of that community, you're an outsider. So it's a bit that capability to kind of have that really strong brand so the caregivers want to be with you more. The other thing we're doing is we're offering training. So the great news is we do a caregiver survey every 3 months, and it tells you a lot. We have a caregiver net promoter score. It's cool, right? And we measure them in 5 key areas. And what we learned is they want more shift stability, which is super hard in this industry because the shifts are changing, but they also want you to invest in them. So we are investing in them in hospice care and memory care. We're building the process to do that in person, as well as we have a vendor who can do it from a distance. That kind of stuff sets you apart and allows you to be more selective, and then have people who stay with you longer. Um, and eventually that's better for all the seniors we care for. So yeah, we were trying to be more thoughtful about getting the talent versus letting it arrive.
Yeah, it all ties into the, employer brand strategy you were talking about earlier. It's all different ways to do that. Yeah, I love that. I guess pivoting a little bit more to you and your personal story, you were in sales for a number of years, and then, tell us a little bit more, like, how did you get into recruiting?
Okay, I worked 8 years in the payroll industry. Payroll industry is referral-based selling. So you'd call on CPAs and bankers. It was paychecks primarily for 7 years. Went to President's Club every year. It was great, but I was selling in Marin County, very niche, very like closed community. So they have to get to know you. Sales experience is really helpful because it teaches you to listen, it teaches you to be thoughtful. You have to go back to these same sources. So I'd have to take care of these small businesses. So if I did a bad job, that follows you. And so it does teach you to really care and try to be a problem solver. I met a guy in 1995, very long time ago, tells you how old I am, who was from the payroll industry, who opened up a small software consulting firm in Los Altos called the Tratner Network. Anybody out there knows this? It was like 25 of us, no dress code, no territories. The two guys who owned it were very progressive, and they had like tie dye in the office, and they're wonderful people, by the way. But there was nothing to leverage. We had a telephone book, and we had kind of our own little homemade software. We would like keep track of people, and Dice was the thing. So if anybody's a technical recruiter, the only way you had like access to good technical people was they put their profile on Dice somewhere on the internet. Java was not a thing. It was, all different platforms and data tools and whatever. And it was super cool because there were no rules. This is where you had to be curious. This is where you had to figure it out. Like I could call on the same company that my peer's calling on, but at some point that became my account, right? So I think that was good because it taught you grit, it taught you how to grit, taught you how to differentiate yourself. In the end, we're all scattered across the Bay Area, and some of those people have done amazing work. I'm privileged to be with them. I still connect with them on a regular basis. We go to dinners and stuff. I think that was interesting entry point for me. I would encourage people to get agency experience because it does teach you how to be self-driven, how to like go out there and get the business. You have to maintain that business. It was hard, the contracts, but we did some full time too, but a great, great experience. And then from there, everyone started contract recruiting, and I picked up a contract at like PayPal and kind of moved on with my career. So, and then leadership is one of those things where you kind of fall into it. I didn't really feel comfortable as a leader for a while. Part about being a leader, I felt like, was realizing everyone else has the same fears you do. I don't know if you feel this. And at some point you realize, actually, I'm not half bad at this. And just kind of who you are as a leader and be true. Don't try to be someone else. Just try to be a good human being and try to help them. So it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, yeah. I love that story about like, just here's what you got to do. I started my career in consulting, and I remember my boss, you know, any consulting firm, at least in my experience, is like you have all these there are a bunch of collections of like small businesses within the consulting world, because you have, a book of business you have to maintain in revenue targets. And as you get more senior, your job becomes more and more about sales. Like I always tell people on our sales team, like I had to do sales for a lot of my career. Like I had to manage clients and keep them happy. And, I was the one they were calling if we missed deadlines and the product wasn't working, and I was the one selling. So like I get it in a lot of ways. But I remember my boss was like, here's a list of people, call them. I was like, like, 24 years old or something, and like cold calling people.
It's a good motivator.
Yeah. And I was like never so happy as when I got the person's voicemail and I didn't have to talk to them.
And even when they did answer, you'd be like, oh, I got a live person. What do I do?
Yeah. Oh shit. What am I supposed to talk to this person about? But yeah, no, I think but that's like, sometimes as I went, uh, through my career there and, I would be like, have you, to some of the people on my team, like, have you gotten that information we needed yet? No, but I sent him an email. I'm like, have you picked up the phone and called him? No. I'm like, pick up the phone and call them. Like, you got to do it. Like, what are we scared of here?
So we're helping people in their careers, yeah, a hard thing, but that once you get past that fear, that's one thing people ask me about a manager. Like, when did you make the shift? I just stop being afraid. There's a certain point where you're like, yeah, I don't care. Let's just do it, And I think it's very empowering if you can get beyond that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. One question I like to end with is if you, a day after graduation and you had a piece of advice to give yourself, what would it be?
Oh, that is a great question. Oh, what would I tell myself? I think I tell myself to trust myself. Like, I'm going to be successful. I'm going to fail. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to end up in a good place. I'll have a house someday. I'll have a family. It's all good. It's funny. I have 24-year-old twins, and they struggled for a year. And I would tell myself, you're all going to struggle. This is part of what forms who you are. And so kind of embrace it versus kind of be discouraged by it.
Yeah. 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 I know I have a 2.5-year-old and, the hardest thing for me is like letting him struggle. And I'm like, I have to do it. Right. Like when he's trying to figure something out and, you know, whining about it, I'm like, you can do it, buddy. You got it. Like you can figure this out. And but it is hard as a parent to watch that. But I love that advice. That's so true. Okay. Well, actual last question. What do you like to do outside of work for fun? You said you have a French bulldog and you have, older twins. So how do you spend your time? What do you do for fun?
I'm an avid chef. I like to cook food. I like to make food look like a restaurant if I can. Uh, I'm not super bougie, but I like that. And then play golf. And then my wife and I work out a lot. She keeps me fit, so I got to chase her around because it's me. So
Do you do like organized classes or are you more motivated and do it on your own?
we made the transition from Soul Cycle, which I know is mostly like it's not a lot of men in there sometimes, but we do solid core is the big thing now. Agree Pilates, and it is hard. Um, and I just do other stuff to try to be active.
Yeah, yeah. What's your favorite dish to make?
I'm really good with French and Italian. Lately, I've been making really good Filipino adobo. That's my thing.
Oh.
And so I get adobo, but I make a really good steak, by the way.
Oh, I'm I'm hungry. I'm realizing how hungry I am now talking about all this. Well, John, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really enjoyed just seeing your great examples around like employer brand and just like how, excited you are about the shift into a whole new industry and the advice you have for folks around all of that. So I really appreciate you being here and thank you again for joining.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone who is listening or watching. And if you learned something today or laughed, please tell somebody about this podcast. Thank you again to John for joining us. And that's our show. And that wraps up another episode. Thank you for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at recruitersontherise.com. Recruiters on the Rise is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform. Lavalier goes beyond basic note takers to improve your ability to assess candidates with AI-powered interview questions, summaries, and transcription. With Lavalier, you can finally hire with speed and confidence.